morning, everybody, and thanks for coming to our CQI breakfast. It's a real pleasure and honor for me today to introduce an old friend of mine, Andrew Henry. I met Andrew 20 years ago or so, maybe longer ago than that. But Andrew was a teacher at in Okemos. I've since moved to Williamston. Okemos Middle School, and I was on the tech committee, and we got to work together a little bit there, and followed Andrew's career and ascent. And I'll just tell you, he's an MSU grad, so he's somewhat homegrown. And from the Okemos School District, he went on to MSU College of Education and ran EdTech Connect, which was a groundbreaking program at MSU. From there, he went on to the state of Michigan to help prop up eMichigan, the Michigan.gov website. And then the governor appointed him to the director of CEPI, the Center for Educational Performance and Information, and then into the private sector with Learning Point and ProTech, and had his taste of the private sector, and then followed probably his real drive, and that was to be an entrepreneur and to start Red Cedar Solutions Group. And his starting as a company of one, and today runs a company of 50, 60 or so. So in about a 4.5-year period, Andrew's really grown a successful organization. One of the first projects he had was building data for student success, which is a web-based system for educators across the state to use to track student assessments. And if you've noticed recently, I think it was unveiled August 15th, My School Data, which is the governor's portal for education. That too was built by Red Cedar Solutions Group. And really there's quite a list of great accomplishments that Red Cedar has accomplished. So, and today Andrew's going to talk about school improvement, the continuous improvement program, and all of us here, of course, it's near and dear to our heart, the continuous improvement process. And Andrew's going to talk about that and a tool that's been built by Red Cedar called Orange Grove. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome my good friend Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. This morning, I think the thing that I'm most interested in doing and hope to kind of put out there to...
I'm just going to move this glass.
Oh, put it right in the middle. There we go. And to spend a little bit of time talking about what high-performing schools do, that I think, you know, as Bill said, and as we had talked about this presentation and this talk this morning, it's the kind of thing that businesses think about, that in the private sector we're always working on, and we don't think so much about schools sometimes as doing similar activities that we do, but in fact they do. So, you know, kind of the theme here is going to be, you know, what can a business learn from school improvement? The overall tack, as Bill said, I mean, the overall tack is going to be to talk about the school improvement process. You know, if you are one of those Demings devotees, you will know and understand what the connections are, and you know, we'll kind of move through that. Would certainly be glad as we walk through here to field any kind of questions. I'm glad to make this more of a discussion. You know, we're not a big group, more of a discussion rather than just a talk. So feel free if there's any kind of burning issues that you're going to jump out of your seat. I'm glad to field those. But let me you know, talk to you just for a minute about Orange Grove and about where Orange Grove came from. I'm going to use that as the basis for talking and thinking about the talk today. At Red Cedar, what we have ended up with is a large collection. I mean, 50 people who are all devoted to making schools better. Okay, as a company, we have developers, we have subject matter experts in education, we have statisticians, we have psychometricians, we have project managers. What I think is pretty unique about Red Cedar is that if you are a developer, you know something about education. If you're an educator, you know something about data. If you're a database administrator, you know something about project management. it's one of the real strengths, I think, of Red Cedar, is that everyone is involved in every different aspect of any kind of development effort. As Bill was saying, you know, we have work that we do in the public space as well as in the private space. In the public space, we have really started from, I think, this idea of data, okay? And you're going to hear a reoccurring theme throughout the talk this morning about data and about the need for quality data and the need for quality analytics. When I was at CEPI, as Bill said, at the Center for Educational Performance and Information, you know, that was, you know, it was a huge project. I mean, it was a project that was initiated by Governor Engler. You know, for him, what was most important, and this is something that's actually a little bit different than where I came from, but for him, the most important thing was collecting data about schools, was getting schools to do accurate reporting, and you know, ultimately, it was about money, right? I can tell you that in the first year that we instituted what we called at the time the Single Record Student Database, now it's the Michigan Student Data System. But when we instituted that system, the SRSD, the state saved almost $65 million just by asking the question, are you sure this kid hasn't been counted twice? Now, that's not a well-publicized fact. I'm probably under some kind of contract that says I'm not allowed to talk about that. But it was huge, just to ask the question, has this student been counted twice? That was good for the state, but what we're all about is about using that data for schools to get better, okay? And it's a different purpose, right? On the one hand, we have this idea of reporting outcomes. That's what our dashboard work is, reporting outcomes. We count, we work with the assessment office at the Department of Education. We build those numbers, display those numbers, push them out through the web or through reports, whatever they need. And that's reporting outcomes. We think that Orange Grove is fundamentally different, though. Fundamentally different insofar as it is about managing the performance of a school, managing the performance of a teacher, managing the performance of a student, okay? And that's really what we're going to focus on. As Bill said, I think that my background here is probably important to the underpinnings of this company. My background is as a teacher. I was in Okemos for 10 years as a high school teacher, taught some computer science, started the writing lab, worked as the internet technology coordinator so that we could actually be connected to the internet. Remember when that was a big deal? Not so much anymore. But we spent a lot of time up in the ceilings drawing wires around and making drops. That was where I actually first met Bill. That was a pretty big deal to get all that stuff done. When I left Okemos, though, I went to Michigan State University to the College of Education, and I think that was, you know, again, it was a place that has helped form and situate what Red Cedar does, okay? It was all about the research, obviously all about the research. The researchers there were informing practice. EdTech Connect was in the field. We were all over the state, working with districts, working with schools, working with individuals, and consortiums, and you know, looking at friends in the audience here, Nada Murphy from Williamston, back probably more years than we want to talk about, when they were initiating their work to put in a network. You know, EdTech Connect was there, working with teachers and trying to make those connections, those important connections between technology and that stuff that business has used and been working with for years, and connecting that back to teachers, because it's not an easy translation. You know, most often when we go as business people, when we go to a school and we say, hey, we have some good ideas, we have some things that we can teach you, what's the reaction of those schools? Oh my God, right? Yet again, another business person who's going to come here and tell me how to do my business when they've never spent one day in the classroom except as a student, okay? So being around the state, getting to see what lots and lots of people were doing with technology, how they were using, in some cases, misusing technology. I can't tell you how many times I had to counsel a school district that it wasn't about a typing class. It wasn't about taking their typing class and moving it onto computers, that wasn't what technology was all about. And that wasn't what was going to change the practice of their teachers or change the learning of their students. But it was an important time. Learning Point Associates, just as a marker, the North Central Regional Education Lab is underneath Learning Point. Again, it was a place where the work that I was doing started to be situated in a national context, okay? And it was fascinating to me. These are actually in flipped order. I was at CEPI. But it was fascinating for me to realize, and you know, maybe something that we can all congratulate ourselves on. Michigan is way ahead of the curve around data systems at the state level. We've been working on this stuff for 10 years now, and there are states that are still out there who don't have what we think is a really simple idea here in Michigan, that unique student identifier, that thing that makes us able at the state to connect an assessment to a demographic, to an incident report at a school. It's a fabulous thing that we have been working with this so long at the state.
Let's just celebrate some success.
There we go. Michigan's done some good things, absolutely, absolutely. So at Learning Point, though, you know, it really was interesting to see where we were at, interesting to see where Michigan was, and frankly, coming back to Michigan was a real pleasure. When I started Red Cedar, we had, you know, as Bill alluded to, one person. It was me and a part-time project manager. And we were able to get a contract running what they call the Data for Student Success. I would encourage you, again, if you want to see another, you know, thank you, Ray. If you want to see another Michigan success, Data for Student Success is online. If you go to data4ss.org, you can see the state's project to actually put data into the hands of teachers for the purposes of school improvement, okay? It's not just the regular portal. It's not tons and tons of data that every school can use. It is a very discrete number. It's 6 inquiries, and it allows schools to go in, use those six inquiries in the service of their professional development, in the service of their school improvement, okay? We get calls all the time from around the country of people saying, we have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of data, and the schools can't do anything with it, okay? So take a look at that. It's another interesting thing. So here's I think the basic idea, right? School improvement is very simple, right? If you listen to Demings, if you listen to school improvement experts who are kind of singing out of the same hymnal, school improvement should be very straightforward and should be easy. High-performing schools are the ones, like high-performing businesses, that make the shift from reporting outcomes to managing performance, right? I suspect that that's been a theme for you all for years and years, okay? Those schools that are able to do this, right, find the tools, they focus their time and energy on not just publishing a plan, not just it's actually working the plan. As we like to say, it's taking plan and changing it from a noun to a verb, okay? That's the most important thing that high-performing schools do, is that they move from that instance of plan into doing, okay? When it isn't working, what we see at underperforming schools is that they do focus on the plan, okay? And you all know this from your experience, that strategic planning effort that you do, where you spend weeks, months, years gathering the data, putting together a plan. It's beautiful. You present it to your board of directors, or you present it to your board of education. Everyone agrees that that's exactly the plan that you ought to be doing. And what happens to it? The cliche, right? It goes into the book, it goes up on the shelf, and you will have something to refer to. Schools fall prey to that very same thing, okay? Underperforming schools. What the low performing schools are challenged with are a couple of things. okay? And I'm going to go through the 4 steps that you hear in the Michigan School Improvement Plan. They call it gather, study, plan, and do, okay? Gather, the challenge of getting all your data into one place is something that we're all familiar with. We have multiple systems. We have many systems that don't talk necessarily to each other in a technical way. So one of the challenges that schools absolutely have is that they have an HR system, a financial system, an assessment system, maybe an interim assessment engine that sits not in their own school district but somewhere else. It's in the cloud somewhere. They have a student information system, all these different systems, right? And they don't talk to each other. So it's really hard for a school to understand in a single kind of snapshot what they look like. Okay? When they get to studying their data, okay, one of the things that schools are often challenged with, now I want to say that there are a lot of projects out there that help schools get lots of data, okay? One of the challenges, though, is that they're often left with those business intelligence tools, those BI tools, that let them ask the wrong question at the wrong time, of the wrong data, come to the wrong conclusion, and start off in the wrong direction. Let me tell you a story that always sticks with me. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago, working with a school. And that school was trying to figure out, what are we going to work on next? What are we going to do? Things are not happening the way they need to be happening. And they were a bunch of motivated individuals. They were smart. They brought in their community. They made all of the right moves around strategic planning. They were looking at one day at all of the data. They had just reams and reams of printouts all over the room. Okay, they had available to them a data warehouse. You will hear that. There's a great initiative at the state of Michigan to support regional data warehouses. But what they were getting were reams and reams and reams of reports, lots of numbers. And I'll show you a picture of one a little bit later. But one of these reports indicated that they were way behind in the state, comparing their own scores to the state on this one area in mathematics. And it was amazing, I got sucked into it just like everybody else did. We're looking at this and like, there's an 80% difference. Oh my gosh, we need to focus on this. We need to pay attention to this. And everybody starts churning, right? We're gonna have a new math program, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. There's probably 20, 25 minutes of discussion around what are we gonna do with this math problem. And finally, one of the teachers actually looked at the data, spent probably that whole 20 minutes looking, delving, figuring this out. And she raised her hand and she said, we're sitting here making a decision that we're going to change our whole curriculum around math. And do you know that this score here was based on one question? I mean, everybody was frozen in their tracks. I mean, you think about that. Here's a student that takes a state assessment, hundreds and hundreds of questions, and you've got a group of committed individuals sitting around a table deciding that they were going to change their whole curriculum based on one question. That's what I'm talking about here with quality analytics, okay? They're the analytics that ask the right question at the right time, that allow you to make the right action, okay? That's something that's super important and is pretty hard. This is what I was talking about before. Changing plan from a noun into a verb, okay? When you're planning means that what you're trying to do is get to a document, okay? And here's a place where schools who are underperforming miss the boat. When they see that they have a deadline in September, I mean, every school out there, everybody knows they have to turn in their school improvement plan. They know that there's a deadline. They know when they have to complete their work. But they don't get, or they don't understand, or don't have the capacity to execute on that plan. The plan becomes worthless. It's promoted by the Department of Education. You can go to the Department of Ed in any state now, and you can find all the paper supports and sometimes online helps that say you ought to take your plan and actually do it. But that's not what these underperforming schools do. Okay, the underperforming schools are at a loss. All too often, what we see are schools that are driven by individuals, by maybe a school leader who is highly motivated, who can move a team, and then they leave, right? And then you have a team who's maybe without a leader, who comes in, who's got different ideas. There's no continuity between these two groups of people or between these two leaders. So the plan becomes a thing instead of an action. This is the place, actually, in the do stage that I think schools struggle with the most, okay? And it's where we all struggle with the most. Even as businesses, you get caught up in the day-to-day activities, and you can lose track of the plan. Ram Charan has a great book called Execution, and it's the execution stage that underperforming schools most often fall down. Even if they've done all this work, even if they've looked at all this data, even if they've made the right decisions, that's the first 20 minutes of the school year. Now you've got another 9 months when you have to actually execute on that plan. It's complex, and frankly, the tools that most schools are actually given or have access to, most of those tools don't support the execution activities that are important. So you end up in a situation where nobody's really sure what's supposed to be happening now, okay? Here's another idea. If you're in the schools and you hear of this, the RTI, or if you hear people talking about response to intervention, it's about implementation with fidelity, right? So you've got a plan. You know your plan is supposed to work. You have a program that's proven to work. How is it that a school now is going to line up their activities with an actual implementation? And even more importantly, I would say, how do those schools know if their implementation is actually having a positive effect? If through a school year, we're making progress on the goals that we've chosen to adopt as a school, okay? What you'll hear, and which is right, which is part of the answer, is that you need to have an assessment system, right? If you're going to monitor, you need to have an assessment system that goes throughout the year, not a once a year assessment. If you look at the state assessments, they have a particular purpose, right? They're a benchmark. They're one time. They tell you where things are at. But these assessment systems really do need to be throughout the school year. And you need a way to put those scores next to each other and to understand them in particular in the context of a goal that you've created, okay? So, overall, without quality data, without a clear understanding, without comprehensive planning, without a defined monitoring process supports, continuous improvement can't happen. And that's the place where what we're going to talk about here for a couple of minutes, and the product that we've developed called Orange Grove, I think can start to offer some things to school and to offer some thoughts to you all. Okay. So, one single place for all of their data, a system that's easy and intuitive to use, analytics that are objective and present meaningful evidence, guidance through planning, ongoing process support, and a measurement tool that's available anytime, any place. And let me take just a moment there to talk about that, because the rest of the talk, I'm not going to spend any time really talking about the technology. There has over the last couple of years been a profound shift in the way businesses do technology, right? You've all heard Salesforce, you've all heard of the cloud, you've heard of cloud computing, that transfer of local activities. If you're a school district, for years now, I was one of those guys. I was the IT director. I was the guy who was making sure that the servers are running and that the wires were all, nobody had chopped a wire underground somewhere or whatever. But there's a lot of mechanical and back-end support that schools have always been held accountable for, and businesses as well. What we have seen now, if you're familiar with Salesforce.com, if not, they're a fascinating company. They're a $1.5 billion a year company now. And what Salesforce has really forced businesses to do and forced all of us to think about is that value proposition of doing your own hosting, doing your own management of technologies versus letting somebody else do it, okay? And that's a shift that I'm just starting to really see in schools, okay? You hear concerns all the time about security. You hear concerns about, what if somebody gets into our students' data or whatever. And I have to remind people, every day you get on your computer and you do your banking, right? There are billions of dollars of transactions every single day that happen on these, in these secure networks in the same kind of structure. Moving a school technology off of a local platform, off of, that services only available within a small enclosed network is really not where we're at, and that's not where we need to be. We've seen in the state of Michigan, the intermediate school districts have been able to make some of those transitions. I think that those shared services agreements and so on are important. And I see schools also making kind of this last leap of looking at all of their services and thinking, how can we outsource those? How can we make those not only safe and secure, but available 24/7 in a SaaS model, in that software as a service model, something that's subscription-based, you don't necessarily own anything and lives in the cloud. That's the approach that we've taken here. We have gotten a fantastic response to that. In fact, one of my favorite moments of any moment when we're first meeting with a school district is that time when the technology director sits at the table at that first meeting and says, so what does this mean to me? Does this mean I need more staff? Does this mean I need to install something on everybody's computer? And we can happily say, nope, really all you need is a web browser. And they lean back in their chair and they relax and go back to their BlackBerry and talking to people, right? So that's what we're talking about here. In part is moving schools into a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about technology, and a new way of thinking about their school and their systems that are in there. So I'm actually going to go into a demo now. We'll see how well I do with this. Can never. Oops. If you want to take a look at our software and at the site, it's orangegrovesschools.com. You can find out a lot about what we do, but I'm going to go right to the application. Let's see if I'm still logged in. I might not be. There we go. Now, some of this should look very, very familiar to you. Okay, if you are used to technologies that are online, the first thing that we present, and you'll notice just sort of in the layout here, the thing that we emphasize, like I was saying earlier, is we emphasize the do. Okay, and it's kind of funny to us when we listen to how some of our state officials talk about school improvement. They don't start with do. Right? They start with gather, study, plan, then do. We think that the most important place to focus is on do. Okay? And any educator that uses this tool really gets to see a couple of things first. Number one is a calendar. Now this might seem like a trivial kind of activity, but what we found when we spent time with schools, when we talked to school leaders, when we spent time with school improvement teams, was that the coordination of activities was a difficult idea, okay? And you think about schools. I'm going to look at Chris Rue here, one of my Red Cedar colleagues. What Chris says all the time about schools is that often what you find are that schools are collections of independent consultants who all work in the same building. And I think that that's a pretty interesting kind of statement about how schools sometimes operate. That if, in particular, I keep not high performing, obviously, not high performing schools, but those schools that struggle, what you end up with is a bunch of folks who, A, are all committed. It's not about commitment. B, are motivated. It's not about motivation. But just think about that structure. What happens in those traditional schools? Class starts, the teacher does what? Closes the door, and for 50 minutes has students, does their thing, the bell rings, they open the door and release them to the next person who closes the door, okay? That kind of interaction, that kind of working with each other constantly, the kind of interactions that I see and I described at Red Cedar are not afforded to teachers in the same way that we would expect it to be collaborative in a business, okay? And think about calendars. I mean, I'm not sure anymore how teachers use calendars, but I know when I was when I was teaching, I didn't use a calendar. I had no need for a calendar. I just needed to know that there was a staff meeting on Thursday and that I was supposed to be there every day at 7:30. Well, what we've built here, though, is a whole calendar tool. And it's a calendar tool that's not based on what am I doing as an individual. It's a calendar tool that's based on the goals, on the activities, on the objectives and strategies that a school's adopted for their own school improvement. So if you look up here, you can see there's book study, there's a time for analyzing data, there's time for all these kind of activities of school improvement. That's what's being driven, and that's what anybody who's in the system is able to see. Another thing, something that seems very simple to us around our calendars are reminders, right? I mean, we all get reminders. You're supposed to be somewhere, you're 10 minutes late for something else. That's how my calendar goes anyway. What this tool does is remind someone. Every week on Sunday night, a principal gets an email that says, there's 5 activities that ought to be happening this week. You're in charge of one of them. You have 2 teachers in charge of 2 of those other ones, and then as a group, you've got 2 activities. There's a whole reminder system in here. Again, tied to goals, strategies, activities. All of those things have to be front and center. When we look at these strategies, you know, the strategies, having them in front of us and having displays in front of us all the time that are telling us about whether, you know, this particular example, do we have evidence of implementation of a certain kind of activity, okay? Having those in front of us all the time, giving us those checkpoints on a weekly basis, on even a daily basis, of whether we are moving forward in this idea of completing our strategies. Having in front of us objectives all the time. What are the objectives of our school improvement activities? They're available here on the dashboard, and you know, and all of these have the ability to drill down. We give schools the ability then to tie data directly to goals, okay? And you know, here's a particular example that if you take a look at, there's an objective around social studies proficiency, and every day or once a month, a school can go in, they can recheck their target and looks at their data that they've associated with an objective and tells you whether you're making progress or not. Again, these are things that seem straightforward, that seem intuitive, and most often schools aren't given easy access. Remember, we wanted to make this easy for schools, aren't given easy access to that kind of a tool, okay? And you know, again, we could do the same thing with the activities and kind of drill into there. Have they been started? Have they been completed? And show us all of that, okay? So starting with do, let's see how we get to do. Let's go to gather, okay? One of the things that I think is important about this particular tool, I'm going to kind of move through here, but selectively. We were talking earlier about data, about the many different sources of data that a school has, okay? And if you've been in a school system, you know that this is a pretty arduous process for the most part, is getting a hold, if you're a principal, getting a hold of your data, okay? So we've thought about, and in this tool, have made it very specific to what happens in a school. When we went out and interviewed principals all over the state, what we heard was, I have to give people my data, I have to fill out forms, I have to do all these things. The data goes to the state, the data goes to the district. If I get it back, I'm lucky, because I'm not really in control of my own data, which seems, we put a lot of responsibility on a principal. Ultimately, that's the person who's going to be hired or fired, depending on the performance of the school. And yet, there's all these people all around them that have more control of their data than they do. So what you can see here is the different types of data that, in this particular example, this particular demonstration, there's all kinds of data that are available. We think it's important that you're able to see in the same space your state assessment data, that's the MEP up there, or MME if you're in the high school, that you're also able to see interim assessment data, okay? Data that are created on a monthly basis, let's say, based on a testing schedule that you've worked out with a third party. So here we've got the performance series from Scantron, NWEA's map data. I mean, there's lots and lots of data sources that schools are using for those interim assessments. I think the important part here is that what I said to the developers early on was a principal needs to be able to control, use, and view their own data, and they need to upload it. Here's the big thing, right? So here are all the data sets that are available in this particular example, okay? And let's just say they wanted to do ACT and upload their ACT data. What used to happen in the past is they would get their results. It would sit over here all by itself. They'd have to look at it, print it, maybe put it into an Excel spreadsheet. What we've done, though, is say, listen, we know that you get, in this case, ACT Explore data. You get it from the vendor, and you're able to take that CD and do something with it. Here's the 3 simple steps that you as a principal can do. And, look at these directions. Any one of you out here could load that data yourself. So think about what a principal is able to do now. They don't have to have a techie come and sit next to them, okay? They don't have to wait until somebody processes it and throws it into maybe a large data warehouse that actually has what I would say is a different purpose. They don't have to do any of those things. Here's the 3 easy steps to loading that data. You don't have to create your own data mapping. Your district doesn't have to do any kind of specialized work. It's already done and it's built in here. What I had said to the developers was this data has to be, or this interface has to be easy enough that a principal who's able to use email and make an attachment to an email can use this here. And that's really all it is. There were the directions. You choose a year, you choose a template, you choose a file, right? And away it goes and it loads there, okay? And you push the load button. So that was a pretty important thing. Another thing that we have schools that schools often don't pay attention to, sometimes because it's a pain in the neck, is what I call perception data, or what is considered perception data, okay? And if you kind of look at what these are pre-constructed surveys. They're not surveys that Red Cedar created in particular, but they're in the public domain, and you're able to use them. You're often asked to make this correlation. So tell me about my school, tell me about my assessment, tell me about what my programs look like. Now, what's the perception of those programs? And this is an important piece of correlation that a school needs to do. So tell me what my students think about the programs. Tell me what my teachers think about the programs or about the leadership. Tell me what our parents think about the program and how the program's working, okay? So what we have here, I guess the newest thing that we have here that's actually pretty interesting is a culture audit, okay? That idea that, with all the best data in the world, with all the most motivated people in the world, if you have a toxic culture in your school that isn't going to allow any kind of improvement, that's probably where you need to start. You don't need to adopt a new curriculum into a toxic culture. But this tool asks you to focus at least some of your attention on perception. Another thing that high-performing schools know that that lower performing schools seem to struggle with is the number of interventions, the number of programs, policies, or practices that are happening in a school at any one time. And what this tool does and what this asks you to do is to just go through and to describe all those different interventions. Now here's a school with a lot of interventions. How successful do you think this school is going to be if they have 10 different interventions happening at the same time? If you're a small elementary school with, I don't know, maybe 30 teachers and 10 interventions, that's a lot going on, okay? And a lot of research around schools tells us that if you pick one thing and do it for 3 years, not only will you get good at that, but your school's going to get better, right? And now we've got schools that are spending their time on 10 different things over the course of a year. So we ask them to do that kind of analysis. We ask them to go through here and associate their interventions with data, and I'll show you that in a second. This is our newest feature, actually with very little words around it. We just will be releasing it on Thursday. I think I'm probably not supposed to be using this site. But let me tell you about what it is. It is. What this part of the software is all about is rostering. The next sort of step that schools need to be able to do is to say, which individual students are we working with, what students are associated with which teachers, and how do we organize around the interventions that maybe are specific to a small group of students. I was mentioning before the response to intervention. This is the first step of RTI, is making that connection between a student and a teacher, making it explicit, making it something that one teacher can pay attention to a small number of kids, okay, through a profile, who are identified for improvement in certain chosen programs. So I'm going to move past this quick, but that's what rostering is all about. Now this section is what we call study. Okay? And here's some of the places where I think we've done some pretty innovative things. Remember I said earlier that high-performing schools, they know what to pay attention to. They have either individuals or groups of people who have studied and looked at and made decisions about data, turning it into information. Now what this does here is actually give a school a picture based on lots and lots of assessments, based on all their data that's here. It gives them an easy entry into thinking about what things ought I pay attention to. Okay? If you remember, when we came in here, this was a school that's a K-8 school. So we have data from kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade. This, however, asks the school to focus on things that they ought to be focusing on. So if you look here, we've kind of made this display. You can actually change the focus from 4 to 8 to 12, and you kind of build these constellations that a school's able to look at and say, where are we going to pay attention to? Size makes a difference. That big circle that says math with lots of connectors to it, that's telling you that that's a central problem, that's an issue that a lot of things are contributing to and telling you ought to pay attention to. If you just kind of hover over here, we allow a school to see on this very first display, allow them to see the contributing components to why that bubble has shown up, okay? And if you look here, the subject is math, but you've got subgroups that are contributing here, all of your kids, students with disabilities. You have many grade levels. If this is a K-8 building, it's most of your grades. You've got gap to grade level, gap to proficiency, gap to AYP targets. So math is something in this school that they ought to be paying attention to, okay? You see, too, that it identifies subgroups. So we've heard a lot about subgroups from the NCLB. This allows you to start to pull out the particular places to focus on. It also allows you to drill in, okay? So for each one of these, you can click and drill into smaller constellations that allow you to see, again, the size makes a difference here. What we see over here is a constellation around MEEP, okay? MEEP is indicating that there's smaller issues, but we have performance series that's saying this is a big issue, right? So now we've started to pull apart our assessments. The idea here is that as you're accessing this data, you can start to move it, right? You can move it, you can drag it, you can drop it. These baskets are where a school is spending their time doing a data analysis, okay? At this point, they don't know what each of these are, although each one of them is a piece of data, is a graph that they can use. It's something to examine as a group. But this is a way that they're able to pull those baskets together, to take a look at what their data looks like. And eventually, when they've done all this exploration, they're able to build a whole collection of data that says, this is the reason we're going to pursue a particular kind of activity, okay? So, for each one of these, you can click on them. You can see something about your students, and begin to build and to understand the case that you're going to make around a particular intervention, okay? I'm also going to spend just a minute on this, just because it's kind of cool. I think that we've done some interesting things with our data and with the analysis. Here's one that I think is interesting. Similar to some of the stuff that the state puts out, so this wouldn't look unfamiliar to someone who's worked with state data. It's taking a second to create this. But this is the place where we have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of reports that a school can have access to, okay? So even though we've got that first analysis for them, even though we have a place where they can look and they can see these are the things we ought to pay attention to, if they want to do their own exploration, there's tons. There's all kinds of different ways that they can drill into the data and see many, many different looks at it. So it's very precise. It allows a great amount of drill down and actually lets you get, at this point, all the way down to your student scores, okay? So as you're thinking about this tool, or as a school's thinking about this tool, they can think about it at a school level, grade level, teacher level because of rostering, and all the way down to a student level. If you're trying to have a particular intervention for a single student, you've got the data and you have some of the tools that you can start to build that case. Another thing that we spend a little bit of time trying to do, connection's getting slower here.
Students are waking up.
Yeah. All right, we might just go on. Lots of different views. Let's keep it at that. And the question is, again, now that we have all the data, you've seen kind of the do end of things. Study and plan are the two things that are in the middle. The study piece, let me just sort of put it out there that we ask schools to identify contributing factors. We understand that the data is not the be-all and end-all. That all that data that we've looked at and collected can't give us all the answers. We know more about our schools than the data tells, right? So one of the things that we say is, okay, you can create your own kind of contributing factors, okay? And here, you can see some examples in here. We don't have an attendance system inside of this tool, so having the opportunity for someone to say, 2/3 of our kids aren't there on Monday mornings. So how, that's something to look at, okay? The last piece is this intervention analysis. Remember, we talked about interventions, that we had identified them earlier on. What we do and ask in this section is that people actually look at those interventions, identify the data that's associated with those interventions, okay? One of the easiest and earliest slices on an intervention analysis is for a school to say, we have no data to support the idea that we've instituted this particular intervention. And we could go through and we could edit and look at all of these, but there's a description, there's how long has the intervention been in place? There's costs of the intervention. We do have some costing tools that are built into this so that people can look and make some projections about how expensive or inexpensive it may be to institute a particular or support a particular intervention. Okay, and all of these are there's the ability to drag and drop, to bring data from one place to another, and to finally get to, and I think this is your question, what we call the goals, objectives, strategies, and activities section of this. Okay. What we tried to do here was make an easy path for a school to either create or enter in a goal that they need or want to work on. Okay. So for each one of these goals, you have draft goals, you have active goals, you can retire your goals. And for each one of them, you'll see where we allow for this sort of nested behaviors where you've got a goal. Inside of a goal, you have the objectives. Instead of objectives, you have strategies, and then all the way down to activities. Okay, and this is where your question about what do we do or how do we connect up the fact that we have a goal in social studies with the fact that maybe our teachers need professional development, or we need to have certain conditions in the school to be present. We need to purchase a program. We need to have have expert consultants come and spend time in our school. This is where those things actually start to happen. So what you can see in each of these is that, number one, we ask for objectives to be measurable. So you have goals, you have measurable objectives. Inside each of these strategies, you've got monitoring activities. Okay, so you're saying this is how we're going to monitor an activity. You have a strategy statement about what's going to happen, and this is where the people come together with the process, right? I think it's unrealistic to expect, and even though we automate some things like goal statements and objective statements, we make it easy for someone to construct those. This is where the people are, right? This is where your knowledge and the knowledge of the experts in the school come together with the tool. So saying that you have a particular strategy in place that you're going to execute on, and identifying the activities that are most likely going to get you there, whether it's by yourself as a school with a school leadership team or with a consultant, that's where this happens really here. Okay? And then lastly, you get down to an activity, and the activities are pretty specific. They tell you when things are going to happen. This is where the calendar is driven through all of the activities with the various individuals who are responsible for it and so on. What we have found in the schools that have used Orange Grove is that if they move through that gather, study, and into this planning activity, and they do it with intensity and with direction, that this is what drives their entire school year. This is the place where the difference is made. Okay, it happens either offline in high-performing schools. Okay, like I said earlier, there are many high-performing schools that we have a lot to learn from, because they take this process, they understand this process, they have individuals that work it either from paper or maybe through their own mechanisms. But here, you've got the supports for it. So those underperforming schools, the schools that struggle, you can see exactly where they stop in this process. Often it's in the study, right? Often it's in, we've got the data, we think we know what the problems are. No, okay, now we've kind of got a plan, but it's in the execution and the supports. Remember, we started with do. Moving from this plan and moving into the do, with all those activities, with all those planning tools, with all those monitoring and evaluation activities that say, we started with social studies, we said we were going to put an assessment in place, we were going to do an assessment 3 or 4 times a year, we were going to monitor what teachers do in their classroom, we were going to use Marzano's 9 or some other activity to get them to understand how, or get us to understand how things are actually happening in the classroom. This is where the difference is, okay? So I'm actually going to stop there. I think I'm pretty close to my time. I'd love to open it up for questions for a couple minutes. Do we have time for that? If there are questions or comments? Yeah, please.
Within the school, who has access to all of this information, who does not?
That's a great question. It really is up to the school. So, we have it's a delegated authority. We start with the principal, okay? But what I think what you can see in here and what's most interesting to me, we didn't go into how to assign these things, but there are different roles that different individuals can play. It can be, someone who's able maybe to look just at the output and be able to see progress. It can be someone who's actually able to contribute. It can be, but the intention is principals, teachers, community members, and that granular ability to provide access, to an individual, and then underneath it, they're only allowed to see certain things or do certain things. It's really up to the school. What the software though does is promote this collaborative leadership. Okay, it promotes it. It asks people to pursue a particular goal. Maybe there's 4 or 5 people who are going to be particularly attuned to that. They're going to be looking to other people for data. You can do all of that. So, yeah.
My question is for parents, for interested individuals in the community who want to know how the school is doing. Is there a part of this anywhere that they could access?
This tool is pretty specific. So not a bad idea. The question was, community members are interested in having access or knowing what's happening at a school, knowing some of those outcomes. This tool is not built for that. There are tools that are out there for it. You can go to myschooldata.org and you can look at your school there. But this tool is not built for that. Here's an interesting aside though, just as a sort of context here. If you remember, I talked earlier about this being software as a service. Orange Grove as a technology is also a platform. Okay, and what I mean by a platform is that literally others are going to be able to and have already built applications that sit on top of the Orange Grove platform. Now think about what that means. I think that this is actually, to me, is one of the most exciting things about Orange Grove, is that we have third parties now who are able to, with a school's permission, obviously, but are able to build an application that accesses the same data, accesses the same people and permissions, has all these different data displays, and they get to build their own functionality, okay? We have used components of Orange Grove to build applications for other people. So again, we eat our own dog food on this. Orange Grove as a platform is something that another entity, who shall go nameless until they release their own software, but they're building an application that's an accountability application. Orange Grove isn't about accountability, right? It's not about public reporting. It's not about talking to your parents. But I think your point is right on. The data's here, the information's here, and someone else who's really interested in building an accountability app can do a good job sitting on top of Orange Grove here.
I have a couple of questions,
Yeah.
actually. The first is, in organizations or districts that have been successful in using this kind of tool, who is the practical champion? I mean, I know there's like spiritual champions, but who's the practical champion that actually makes certain that everybody that uses it understands what it's for, they know how to use it?
Yeah, I think that you're going to find out it's the principal. You do need this spiritual champion, right? That superintendent. What we know from talking to schools is there has to be agreement, at least from the top of the organization to the bottom, that this is a tool that's okay to use. There's no teacher, there's no principal that's going to step out and say, I'm going to go totally rogue, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to do this all by myself, right? So there has to be agreement that it's a good tool in the system. But from the practical champion, it has to be the principal. I mean, that's the leader, that's what this tool is built around. And it has the supports to help a weaker principal, a weaker leader, kind of step it up. But if that principal is not engaged, this is, it's dead in the water.
So my follow-up question is the second one, which is, what tools have you seen or what resources been successful in helping those champions address any cultural issues, any kind of interpersonal challenges that need to be dealt with on the team?
Yeah.
Does your organization provide those tools, or
Yeah,
have you
we do.
seen districts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Our professional services team has organized all around the state symposiums and get-togethers, places where users can come, traditional users groups. Well, non-traditional users groups, right? Because it's about culture, it's about process. It's not a software. I mean, you saw the technology. Any one of you could come up here and click through this and know how to use the software in 15 minutes. The software is not the hard part. The hard part is, how do you implement all of the ideas, all of the things that happen when you use Orange Grove? How do you implement them in your school? How do you make your school stronger? And that has been our approach, right, is through the associations. We work with the Elementary and Middle School Principals Association and the High School Principals Associations to put together events to bring people together who are interested in this. It's fundamentally, even if it's not about Orange Grove, it's about leadership in a school. And that's what this is really organized around.
I'm going to break in
You
here.
are, okay.
I always have that role. I know that Andrew's going to stay around afterwards to answer questions. Some of you may be willing, want to stay for quite a while, and please feel welcome to. But we did promise for those who need to get back to work that we'd be closing at 9, so I'd like to give Andrew a big applause and thank you.